Chicago's favorite holiday tradition is back at Lincoln Park Zoo and celebrating 30 years. Get your tickets now for Zoo Lights, presented by ComEd and Invesco QQQ, and enjoy fun seasonal activities while strolling through your zoo under 3 million lights this holiday season. Zoo Lights will be back November 15th and run through January 5th. Tickets are just $7 to $10 with select free nights. Get your tickets at lpzoo.org/zoolights and learn more and secure your spot before it sells out. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema. Be sure to catch the cult classic The Fall, now streaming exclusively on Mubi, and a spectacular new 4K restoration. Filmed across 24 countries over a period of 4 years, Tarsem Singh's ostentatious epic sees a bedridden stuntman played by a magnetic Lee Pace spin an escapist fantasy for a hospitalized young girl. You can start streaming this film and more for 30 days free at Mubi.com/CityCast. Today on CityCast Chicago, this weekend is Open House Chicago, where you can tour nearly 200 of the city's most historic museums, churches, homes, theaters, and skyscrapers for free as part of the 2-day festival. And yes, they've got some modern marvels in the bag as well, my friends. All you need is an itinerary. And of course, learning a few of Chicago's most common architecture terms couldn't hurt. Trust me. So we're revisiting our conversation with Sun-Times architecture critic Lee Bay to help us speak the language of Chicago's steel, brick, and limestone. It's Thursday, October 17th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. What's good, Lee? Welcome back to CityCast Chicago.
Thank you. It's good to be here, my friend.
Let's start with this big question. Why do we spend so much time in Chicago talking about and obsessing over architecture? Even in casual conversations, it feels like it comes up a lot.
You know, it really does. I mean, it's like the other sport in town, right? Discussing architecture. You know, part of the reason is because our history is so wrapped up in our buildings. You think about the World's Fairs, plural, both 1893 and 1933. You think of the Great Migration, public housing. I mean, all that stuff. The history of Chicago and its people is written in its architecture. For years, most of the city's existence, the best firms and architects to ever practice in the game were either from here or they did their best work here.
Oh, okay.
And then that, plus being wrapped up, in our own personal histories, goes a long way toward making architecture so important here.
Let's get into talking about some of the different building styles, some of the different architectural styles that are not only seen in our beautiful downtown, but across neighborhoods. And for me, I got to start at home. I grew up largely on the South Side with my grandmothers living in Beverly, in Chatham, and Calumet Heights. And they all lived in what I grew up to know as a bungalow. Right. I know a lot of people have heard this term, whether it's bungalow or bungalow belt. But what does it actually mean? What does a bungalow actually look like? And what's the history in Chicago?
Well, a Chicago bungalow is a particular thing. I mean, the term bungalow had, already existed, comes out of Asia, for these kind of small houses. The Chicago bungalow is kind of a different animal, where it's a 1.5-story building, so a house. So it has the first floor and an attic, and it was able to be repeated, to be built over and over again efficiently, which was the perfect house for a growing city. It's fireproof, which for reasons we both know is really important. Chicago had tons of clay pits around it, so you could get the building material quickly to make the bricks to build the house. But the beauty of it is, in addition to it being a flat out beautiful house, in and of itself, it was affordable, and in its affordability, it had everything that the rich guy's house had. It had a fireplace. Sometimes it was real, sometimes it was faux. It had decorative brick, had Spanish tile roofs, it had art glass. It had everything that the rich guy had, and land around it, a small city lot. And that's what made it so popular. And they're durable. I mean, these things are a century old now, and you can walk into one now and it's in mint condition.
For sure. And again, I grew up surrounded by them over off 87th and Ashland. But when you think about like the term bungalow belt, oftentimes we're referring to the southwest, southeast side, the northwest side. Is there a reason they tend to be concentrated in such ways around the exterior of the city?
That's where the growth was in the city. That's where
Mhm.
there, by the 1920s, where there was land to build on. And also, it puts you close to some factories. It puts you close to transit, streetcars that could take you to factories. But it was open land there.
So from the bungalow 1.5 story to another term people will hear a lot is graystone. When you're thinking about the two flats, maybe the three flat apartments, you know, brownstone has such a sort of I feel like a is in the cultural lexicon in New York. But I don't know if the graystone is, but essentially they're very similar in nature.
They are. I mean, you get a little closer to the heart of the city, and where room is a premium. You can't build necessarily a ton of houses with land all around in the backyard, so you have to build efficiently. So you built these townhouses, right? And then the gray and the graystone is Indiana limestone, which is pervasive in this area. I mean, even the old Thornton Quarry is where you could get some of that stuff from back when the city was building. And this gives Chicago the gray and the graystone. It's a very durable stone, beautiful to look at, and you can see it everywhere from Bronzeville to Inglewood to North Lawndale.
I mean, a ton of bungalows and graystones at this point feel like they're in rehab phase. So many things are, in many cases, being gentrified in neighborhoods or being, sort of torn down and replaced with a modern version of the two flat or the bungalow. Are graystones still something that are being built in Chicago?
Not in the way it was in the past. I mean, the building material is very expensive today. Even if you could find, I was just reading about Joliet limestone, which is different. It's a little more beige in color. How one of the few remaining Joliet limestone mines is going out of business. So the mines are depleted. The expense if you find them to build, it's kind of going out. So what you're having is synthetic stones and other things that are being used, or even recycling stones. There's a church in Antioch
Mhm.
near the Wisconsin border, which unfortunately, to me, uses the exterior stone from St. John of God Church at 52nd. It used to be at 52nd and Loomis. So you get that on occasion. But yeah, there are other stones, synthetic stones, that have come into play now.
We talk a lot about the bungalow and the graystone when you think about Chicago building out, but at a certain point, Chicago also started building up. When I think about high rises, largely were represented when you think about the construction of public housing,
Yeah.
and then also Chicago pioneered in many ways the proliferation of the skyscraper. But those two aren't one and the same thing. What's the difference between like a high rise and a skyscraper in modern terms? Because that's obviously changed over the decades.
It has, and you can start a fist fight in a bar over among architecture types about what it is. But essentially, a skyscraper is and was and is a building that obviously is tall, but the exterior walls are not doing the work of holding it up, right?
Mm.
So what you have is a steel skeleton, or nowadays, concrete skeleton, that essentially is the bones of the building and that allows it to achieve its height, and then it's clad in something, whether it's glass or some other material. Now, a skyscraper can be a high rise. Um,
But not all high rises are skyscrapers.
exactly.
Okay. So how tall are we thinking when we start getting into skyscraper territory?
Now that's another part that's going to start a fight, right? But
Oh my God,
if
y'all fighting over a lot in this bar, Lee.
everything, right? Yeah. And we haven't even served any drinks yet, and we're already brawling, right? Tall and super tall. So I'm old, right? So I'm 57. So Sears Tower, Willis Tower, Sears Tower,
Serious
tallest,
now.
right? Tallest building in the world from the time it was built in '73 all the way to the '90s, right? Now it's something like the 22nd tallest building
Mhm.
or 23rd tallest building. And so beyond the height of the Sears Tower, you get into the other category, which is super tall. So you think about Burj Dubai, some of the buildings you see popping up in the Middle East. So there's high rise, there's skyscrapers, tall buildings, Sears Tower, and then super tall, these slender, but just sort of astronomically tall buildings.
Do we start escaping the high rise around 10 stories, 20, 30? Like when have we made that sort of jump?
So, it's going to start the fight. But
I need you to put some trunks on. What side? Which corner you in?
All right. So I'm going to say that anything over 15 to 17 stories, that's the transition point. So it's a high rise. Beyond that, beyond 15 stories, 14 stories, it's a skyscraper because it's going to need the bones to hold it up. Beyond 1,200 feet, then it's up until 1,200 feet, it's tall. I would say beyond that, it's super tall.
Mm. I mean, when we think about a high rise, right, so much comes to housing, but I think high rises are very interesting in our history because they really talk about perception. They really talk about the difference in class because you could think of high rise and now you might think, oh, a high end building, a building with amenities, a building with a doorman. And yet high rises for so long were the building style of public housing, which was the opposite of amenity field, right? Resource deprived, often sort of left to their own devices. How has the story of the high rise also been the story of Chicago?
That's a fantastic question because, and to complicate it even more, we were building residential high rises and commercial high rises that the ones that we know about, that we talk about, Marina City, Sears Tower, Sandburg Village, Lake Meadows. At the same time, we're building high rises for public housing. So, it's kind of like one contributes in the 1950s and 60s and 70s to essentially the rebirth of the city. Sears Tower, John Hancock, others. And the other high rise contributes to the worst parts of Chicago's legacy, warehousing the poor, depriving them of resources. And it's the same building type. It's the darndest thing.
So far in this conversation, we've talked a lot about building types, some things that I feel like if you were walking in Chatham, you saw a bungalow, you could point at it and go, that's a bungalow. You see a gray stone, that looks pretty gray, looks like limestone, that's a gray stone, right? All right, high rise, skyscraper. But now we also when we're thinking about architecture, we're thinking about architectural styles in Chicago. One that a lot of people probably think they recognize in Chicago, but definitely comes up a lot is something like Art Deco. Right? That's not a bungalow. That's not a high rise. That's a style. But what does it mean when someone says a building is an Art Deco style building? And what are some examples?
Well, Art Deco comes out of France, right? Out of this essentially a World's Fair from 1888. And it's this sort of stylish, where the building style is represented in the architectural detailing of it. So we think about an Art Deco building. We think about, for instance, the Carbon and Carbide building downtown.
It stands out. It's so fire.
Does. It really is.
Fire.
But then you got that, right? Mm-hmm. But then you also got my favorites in the book, Chicago Vocational High School.
Yeah.
Which the buildings don't look alike, but they are alike. They both belong to the Art Deco family. If you're ever in the Gold Coast, off the streets, into streets like Astor and others, you may see a row house, a townhouse or two that has an Art Deco style. And usually, again, this really high style way that the ornament is applied. It usually, curves and it kind of applies to nature and that kind of thing. It also is a brother. It gets so complicated. See, this is why we fight. It's also related in some reason and influenced by Egyptian architecture. So what's happening in the 1920s is that King Tut's tomb gets opened up, and people are like, "What? Egypt? My God!" And so if you look at the Reedy Storage Company building on Clark Street, and I think Lakeview, that's an example. If for listeners who really want to get down, and get on the internet, look up the Knights of Pythias building, Pythias. They used to be at 38th and State, designed by black people for a black fraternal order, built for black people. And if you look around, the terracotta of that building still pops up now and then in museums and that kind of thing. But it's an Art Deco building, but it's
I was like, isn't the like that Skidmore, Owings and Merrill like Sphinx-like building?
uh, well, it would sort of predate that. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill really comes a little bit later. I mean,
Okay.
and they're really known for these sort of steel and glass buildings, like Sears Tower, like John Hancock Building. So we're talking about this sort of the last gasp of this kind of very ornamental architecture that takes place before we go full modernism and we get into the work that Mies van der Rohe did and others did that brings us down to steel and glass minimalism, modernism.
So let's move there. We're moving from the sort of Art Deco, the opulence of what the 20s and the 30s.
hmm
What is driving this move towards modernism, and how can we identify that wave and that style?
Well, some of the roots of this goes back to 1930s Germany and the Bauhaus movement. And these movements are like saying, enough with the past, enough with these neoclassicist styles. We are of this moment, and our architecture should reflect this moment. So
So get
gone.
rid of the columns and the Gothic church like the buildings, your tribunes and your Wrigley buildings, these revival buildings.
Exactly, right? And in that modernism, in that time, as a time, that time should be expressed very much by the lack of ornament, the rationality of the architecture, the beauty of the architecture will come from the form of the architecture, not necessarily what's applied to it to make it pretty. The Nazis in Germany closed the Bauhaus. They said that's decadent. Not only is the architecture practiced there decadent, the art that's practiced there decadent, and y'all decadent. So get out. So they're like, we got to get up out of here. So people like Mies van der Rohe, Peter Hans, and others, they come to America. And many of them come to Chicago, where people are, where by the 1920s and 30s and 40s, Chicago is rebuilding itself again. So IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, their College of Architecture and Design and Photography are sort of bringing these people in. In fact, there was actually the new Bauhaus that was at IIT in those early days. And Chicago, because you're absolutely right, there is a bottom line to this. If I have to build a building that's 80 stories, I'm not going to want it to look like a Roman Senate building. I'm not going to put columns and that kind of stuff. So modernism, there is an economic value to it.
Yeah. You also see in some of those buildings a little bit more like public space. I'm thinking about outside of the Daily Center, but then as we move towards postmodernism, like which might come up a lot as people think about like the Thompson Center, for
Yeah.
example, you do see a return of some of that maybe gaudiness, maybe in form though, right? Maybe it's not in ornaments of like, oh, there are gargoyles and owls hanging off of everything. I mean, Harold Washington Library's got a little bit of that, but you do see people kind of getting a little bit more creative and expressive. So how does postmodernism change modernism a little bit? What are those key differences?
Well, like anything over time, it gets played out, right? So by the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, there had been 30 years of the black box. And architects were coming in and they were saying, young architects and even influential older architects were coming in, they're saying, enough of this, enough. It was cool back in the day, but now any mark and moron wants to build it, wants to be able to do this. And the revolutionary nature of what it once was is lost. So what happens is that the postmodern, after modernism movement, it wants to reach back and reclaim some of the things that were lost when modernism became in vogue. But the idea is not necessarily, you look at NBC Tower here in Chicago, over on Cityfront Plaza, wherever it is over there. It clearly is a reference. It's a clear reference to a 1930s building, Art Deco
A little
building.
echo deco.
Exactly. So it looks back. As it looks forward, it looks back. And then you compare that to the Thompson Center, which looks forward more than it looks back, right? It's saying we will take the elements of what made a building, a government building. We'll take those elements. We'll take the dome. Give me that. Give me the plaza. Give me the red, white, and blue. But let me apply it in a way that's modern, that's contemporary.
Because it also looked like a mall.
It did, exactly, right? And futuristic in a way. So postmodernism kind of does that. It refers to the past. It can sometimes repeat elements of the past, and then sometimes it can take elements of the past and remix them and place them into a contemporary context.
There are so many other terms that we didn't get to in this conversation that people can learn about in your book, they can learn about at the Chicago Architecture Center. Before we let you go, I feel like we've learned enough to better ask this question. With all the photographs you've taken, all of the tours you've given, everything you've learned, what is one of your favorite buildings in Chicago?
Oh, that's a good one. As of late, it's really been Pride Cleaners and Chatham, 79th and St. Lawrence.
Can you describe it?
So this is a building. This is a cleaners, a dry cleaners that has what's called a hyperbolic paraboloid roof. So it's a concrete roof that's tilted almost like a glider, a hang glider. Built in 1959, is very much of that time. I absolutely love that building. Of newer buildings, I like Aqua Tower, Jeannie Gang's building. I'm seeing, and I'm going to see more of it for the column, but I'm liking Salesforce Tower. These are one of the 3 buildings at Wolf Point that have been built. This one just opened in December. So these are glass buildings, ubiquitous blue glass buildings, but I'm kind of liking that as well.
Lee, this has been a fantastic conversation. I am trying my best to learn more and more about Chicago architecture, just so I can sound, one, a little bit more pretentious, but also I can help guide people when they ask me, why is this building so cool? What is the story of it? And again, I love what you said. Chicago's story is being told in the evolution of our buildings. So thank you so much for stopping by and sharing a couple of those tales.
Thank you. Always. Thank you.
Lee's book that I mentioned is called Southern Exposure, The Overlooked Architecture of Chicago's South Side. Please be like me and put it on your bookshelves. To show off the terms you learned today, learn more about the sites you can visit during Open House Chicago at the link in our show notes, and you can compete in their photo competition. Before we get out of here, make sure you've bookmarked our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you're going to find our latest articles, our neighborhood and walking guides, our best food and drink list, and so much more. Of course, I can't let you go without some good news. Our friends over at the Chicago Reader are gearing up for their Best of 2024 list, and we need you to nominate CityCast Chicago for Best Podcast and Hey Chicago for Best Email Newsletter. Just go to the link in our show notes, and we are in the City Life category. Yo, I am greedy, and I'm trying to get to 4 in a row. Yes, if you are new to these parts of town, CityCast Chicago has been named the best podcast for the last 3 years in a row. Yes, all 3 years that we have been here, and I ain't going on sabbatical to play baseball or nothing. We trying to keep this streak running. So I'm sorry for whoever is the Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon equivalent podcast in Chicago. I would like to say maybe next year, but I'm gonna try to be doing it next year too. So hey, let's take care of this year. Visit the link in our show notes and nominate CityCast Chicago for Best Podcast and Hey Chicago for Best Email Newsletter in the City Life category. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks, hopefully asking y'all to vote us Best Podcast and Email Newsletter. All right, as always, I appreciate y'all for listening. We can't do this without y'all showing up. So please join me bright and early tomorrow. Peace.